Hello and welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast. My name is Prav Prathapan and I'm from Encephalitis International. Today we're speaking with someone who has spent the last 2 decades navigating the long-term impact of herpes simplex encephalitis. Someone who has learned, adapted, and continued to show generosity by sharing his experience so that others might feel less alone. Thank you so much, Denis Bowden, for joining us. Welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. Just for some context, Dennis is from Australia and I'm from London, so it's a massive international call we're doing here. But yeah, lovely to be connected with you, Dennis. And thank you so much for sharing your story. It's really important for our community. So do you want to start off by telling us about your life before encephalitis?
Yeah, certainly. Before encephalitis, I'm an aeronautical engineer, so I work in the aircraft industry. And engineering is something that's my way. My brain works very, very well. But also prior to that, I've done a lot of sport with martial arts, gym instructor, get out rock climbing, skating, kite surfing, so a whole range of things. And we got to the point with family where we had a young daughter, so she was 2 years old. I got a lot more focus on family. And then, unfortunately, that's when encephalitis hit.
Right, yeah. I mean, you're involved in so many things. And yeah, tell us about how encephalitis hit because it was quite subtle at first. Seemed like an ordinary cold at first, right?
I had a cold, and the normal thing. I used to have a cold once or twice a year, and you go home and feel a little bit flat and feel sorry for yourself. But on the scheme of things, you're just like a sleep deprived, and it's nothing to complain about at all. But I used to get cold sores. So after this cold, I've got a cold sore. And then the following day, my wife told me to go to the doctors because she noticed something that just wasn't quite right. So I went to the doctor, spoke to the GP, and he asked me what the problem was. And I couldn't see or tell what the problem was. So out of that appointment, nothing really much came out of it. Then when I came home, I think it was that night, my wife packed me up and took me to the local hospital. Fortunately, my condition was deteriorating pretty quickly. And when we got to the hospital, why I say fortunately is because the symptoms, they were able to diagnose it quickly, relatively as well. When we got to the hospital, they asked a lot of general awareness questions. What is your name? What day is it? Where are you? That sort of thing. And I could answer my name, the date, I didn't even know the year at that stage. When they asked me where I was, I knew exactly where I was physically, but I couldn't remember the name, Flinders Hospital. So I could tell the doctor that was diagnosing me at the time, talking to me at the time, that I could walk home if I wanted to because I could picture in my mind the route home. But yeah, there was a lot of details that were not coming. So obviously part of the brain function wasn't working well. So they took me aside and did the old lumbar puncture and diagnosed me with viral encephalitis fairly quickly, and then got me onto the drugs. So I was in the hospital, I think, for about 10 days. And then after that, came home for 10 days and I was still on treatment. So a nurse would come in and top up and do the shots. When I was in the hospital, actually going through the treatment program, it was, yeah, the most painful and worst place I've ever been. Um, at my worst, I I couldn't see anything around me. It was just grey, and the only thing I was aware of was when they come to do the treatment. So I was sort of mostly asleep, but not really sleeping. And when they came and did the treatments, it hurt like heck. I've never have felt anything so painful in my life. So actually, when I was at my darkest, I asked them to stop treating me with the drugs because it was that painful. And I knew what was probably going to come out of it as a result. But yeah, I just wanted the pain to stop. It was that intense. Um, when I was at the darkest there as well, obviously I would have been at a place where my brain was not doing much, but a small part of it was there was still this little engineering logic part happening. Um, and I grew up in Byron Bay, there's lots of hippies there and alternative lifestyle. You're talking about spirituality and grew up with Christianity and, talking about there's more to life. And I actually found myself at the point of going, what is there? Everyone talks about there's something else. There must be something more to my life. What's our spirit? Where's God? All those sort of questions that people sometimes ask in the hard times. So I searched, and I was looking for this all big glowing aura, and I didn't find it. And I looked harder and harder and harder. And the best analogy, what I could come up with, was you're in a big dark tunnel, everything's almost black. And right at the end, I could see just a little dim light, a faint glow. And that was enough for me to say, all right, there's something more. So it's time to start fighting back. And that's where I made the shift to decide to fight, decide to come back and decide to, all right, as much as it hurt, we're going to keep taking it. So I expect that was probably also the time that the drugs were having an effect to turn the disease around, because that things started to improve slowly from that point. When I got home, I was sleeping in the ballpark of 18 hours a day for quite a while. So yeah, I still need a lot of rest. And with the what happens with cold sore virus, it travels up the nerve from your nose up to your brain. It comes to your temporal lobe area. And it took me a while to get the hang of what changes that have made in my brain afterwards. So there was a lot of learning with that one. One of the ones, the main ones I noticed early was memory. Memory was pretty badly affected, but it's only part of the memory. The main part was memory for names. That's absolutely abysmal. And memory for events. So if we did something tomorrow, I may not remember it, or a week away, it starts to fade and feels like if someone mentions it, feels like maybe it was a year away. So they would fade, but it was a bit random. Some things I remember really well, and some things I wouldn't. It means as a husband, I had a good excuse for when I forget to do what my wife tells me, but you don't get away with it. It's not an excuse. And the other one I had was intense emotions. So mostly grief type emotions. So I'd drive, when I started going back to work, I'd drive a half an hour to and from work, and most of the drive I'd just be in tears. Once I was dealing with people, it was fine. But when I was by myself, it was psychologically not a good spot to be. So over time, like I started working, fortunately, my boss was fairly flexible. So I started working, doing half days, and then over time, just slowly increased back to full-time work. A lot of my memory function and brain function does work well. So fortunately, my engineering part of my brain, wherever that is back here, wasn't really affected. So what I have is, in my mind, areas of memory don't work, but if I understand something, I can work it out. So it's using a different part of process. So I can look at something, see how it goes together, and I don't need to memorize that this bit's connected to that, connected to that. I can look at it and I know that how the flow of things is going to work. And I've since then used that same process in things that are very, very different. So I used to instruct classes at the gym and trying to memorize choreography. You're trying to memorize the song and what moves to do with the song at the different parts. And what I found is using that engineering part of my brain is going, all right, instead of trying to memorize it, okay, step left, step right, go forwards and backwards, jump here. I'd sort of listen to the music and try and understand the mood of the music, understand what we're trying to achieve with the workout. And with that, it was getting that engineering part of my brain, which could then work out the sequence of the moves to do with it. So functionally, it was memorizing, but just using a different process than rote learning and repetition. Took a while to get that. It took a while to rely on that. Also, I did find there were things that subconscious memory. So there's things that I'd learn, but if someone asked me to recall it, I wouldn't. But then if I wasn't trying to consciously recall it, it would come up. And I don't rely on that much now. It doesn't come up, but early in the recovery, I certainly had that. And learning to rely on that was really hard when you can't consciously, deliberately do something. But when you're not thinking about it, it's there. Learning to rely on that is very, very difficult. So that was the crux of the short-term encephalitis. And then I slowly got used to that, and slowly got used to the emotions. One of the other big things that I did have at the time, which is one of the things we're going to focus on this chat, was what I call encephalitis dreams. During encephalitis recovery, as I said before, I'd be sleeping a tremendous amount, but a lot of that time was not very effective sleep either. I'd have dreams that were very, very vivid and a lot of detail and very, very intense. So they include, all your senses going flat out. So that I'd wake up with these dreams and I'd be physically exhausted and mentally exhausted. At the worst one, I actually had two dreams at the same time. And that was very exhausting. I don't know how it happens, but it's imagine you're out on a sporting field, you're playing sport, everything's going flat out and you've got to be really focused. But at the same time, you're doing an exam and you're running out of time and you're doing both of those together, totally different things, but using your full concentration. And I woke up from that absolutely shattered. But the other problem with the dreams is a lot of them were where I really struggled. In my mind, they were absolutely horrible, disgusting things. There was best analogy is there's the odd horror movie, not that I watch horror movies. I like fun ones better. There's the odd movie you might watch or see a snippet of, and it's not necessarily about scary things. It's just visually, and the whole concept's just disturbing. And it can make you feel a bit nauseous. You're just, oh, how can someone think of that? That's the sort of things I had in my dreams. They're just visually disturbing and morally disturbing. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night and just be absolutely stumped as to how can my head actually think of these things? How can that come out of my head? So I was really, really distressed at that stage. And some of these things were bad enough, well, most of them, that I did not want to go to sleep at night. And if I woke up in the middle of the night, I did not want to go back to sleep. So that's why I say I very much needed a lot of sleep, but the sleep I was getting was terrible and I didn't want to be there. So you'd have that scenario of trying to avoid the problem actually makes it worse. So we tried, at the time, I spoke to my GP about it, and we tried some sleeping drugs, which sort of made me not dream, but I found that it's still not sleep. It makes your brain stop, but it's very different to sleep for me personally. So I'd still wake up not rested. And I personally felt it was better to go without the drugs and try and work with the unpleasant side of things. Very, very, very fortunately, over time, those dreams faded and got back to pretty normal dreams. But it took a long time to get there and it was pretty distressing. So yeah, pretty horrible. And if anyone else has what I call encephalitis dreams, definitely try and find someone good to talk to because you need all the help you can get to learn to manage those. They faded for quite a while, but then probably about 7 to 10 years after having the encephalitis, I started having vague moments and the dreams started coming back again and the emotions started coming back again. And the vague moments I wasn't too aware of, but my wife helped me to realize some of them. And there was one or two times where I just was not there at all. She'd be talking to me and I wouldn't respond. So she'd ask the same question, but I'd respond with an answer that was different to what she was asking. So she'd ask the question again and I'd give the same response, not even remembering that she'd asked the first question. This was actually a nice side effect of encephalitis. What I developed was temporal lobe epilepsy. So it took a little while to diagnose that, but fortunately the doctors diagnosed it fairly quickly on the scheme of things. And the interesting thing is when they did that, they also took and showed me a CT scan of my head, and they could show the scarring with the brain as big white area of scarring. They pointed that out to me. For me, funnily, that was a bit of inspiration because I could see that big bit of scarring and went, well, doing all right with that. You'll still be pretty functional. So bring on the challenge. What's next? Part of my brain has a slightly different reaction, but it's that boy taking on a challenge type response was probably constructive at that time. So yeah, with that, there was a lot of going back to similar effects to what I had after the original encephalitis. So the emotions went up through the roof again. The dreams went down, and psychologically, I went downhill with that as well. The dreams also, with the lack of sleep, it was a bit grey as to what was a dream and what was a memory because the memory is not functioning well. Um, as an example, when you wake up halfway through the night sometimes and you go, did I do that yesterday? And then you wait for your conscious to come around and you go, all right, now you play it back and go, yep, we did this, 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 and this. But no, that's totally different. I dreamt that. So you can untangle that. Whereas I was left with a lot of things that I couldn't necessarily untangle. So that was a really dark turn. One of the side effects on the encephalitis a little bit as well is apparently, I don't know if it's the encephalitis or if it's an engineer thing, but we tend to overanalyze and obsess on things, apparently. We think it's just being thorough and diligent, but yeah, you've got to be very thorough. So my brain, I'd spent a lot of time overanalyzing this thing, but since I've spoken to a psychologist, obviously there's bad things with that because the more you repeat something, the more you reinforce it. And if it's wrong, you're reinforcing what's wrong, and reinforcing the emotion, the intensity and everything. So that's where you get the old downhill spiral. It happens sort of slowly, but definitely steadily. Going back a little bit, when I was back in the encephalitis in the hospital and I was looking down the dark tunnel, one of the things that turned me around psychologically to keep fighting is I've done a traditional Japanese martial arts where we used to work and fight really hard. One of the things that we'd do is we'd stand in the middle of the hall. One person would put their hands up on the head and the other person would punch them in the belly. The challenge was to push the other person back to the opposite side of the hall. And if the person that was being punched pushed forward, the person that was doing the punching pushed harder back the other way. And it's a traditional full contact karate. Once you got the knack of it, it was always the person receiving the punches that will push the puncher back to the opposite side of the wall. And a lot of that is getting hard and getting strong, but just being determined and just push through. And that's what I found when I was looking to try and keep battling with the encephalitis and decide to recover, was finding that attitude and going, all right, I'm going to take a head on and push through. I've used that a lot of times over the years, but learnt about it since too. There's pros and cons to that. So I'd get in the hard times, I'd push hard and go, all right, I've got to push, I've got to push. And there's a lot of anger in that, but it also became a lot of self-directed anger and self-directed hatred and no tolerance. So with that, it was definitely a downward spiral. I was quite blunt. Well, I wasn't quite blunt with my wife. But she found out about it because through a lot of this encephalitis and trying to do recovery and trying to understand it, I keep notes and journals, and I've got about 10 over the years. But when I'm going through more, I'll write more notes. I originally was doing it to try and help memorize what did I do yesterday? I'll write some notes and I can read it tomorrow and we can read it next week, but also write where I'm at and what I'm finding. And my wife would occasionally read those journals because I was not necessarily explaining to her what I'm going through. And particularly in this sort of scenario, in my mind, I'm in the position going, I can't. I I have no tolerance for what I've done. How can I share that with someone I love? Um, Bear with me a sec.
Yeah, no worries, Dan.
But she told me to go and talk to her doctor and share psychologically where I was at. I had an excellent GP. She was really, really good. And through that consult, I saw her pause and be stumped a few times because she was questioning how to react. And she said quite openly she was debating whether or not to actually let me go home. She did, but also gave me some referrals to psychologists to work with. So through some of this, I've worked with one psychologist that we didn't quite connect, but then she referred me to a neuropsychologist. And that really helped for me, again, for my engineering and scientific brain. The neuropsychologist would talk about it in terms of, like I touched on before, brain regions that do different functions. So then I could understand it from the engineering perspective that, okay, I've got this function that does that, that's not affected. This function is affected, but you get the brain does some cross wiring so that this area can take up some of the function that's over here that's no longer working. And so I could sort of start to translate that and navel gaze a little bit and see how some of those things are happening in my head and try and better understand it. I felt better than I was, so I got back to a manageable state. But I still was dealing with those issues internally for quite a while. I still didn't feel that I could share any of that with her. And I had what turned the whole thing around is, again, relating back to my engineering brain, if someone tells me something, um, that's fine, I'll understand it, but I like to see it for myself or see a fact because that just helps reinforce it in my brain. There we go, I can see it. That's true, that's right. So part of dealing with these memories, what felt like memories, I had nothing black and white to prove them as true or not. So again, a part of the internal debate, it's going, you can't prove they're not true, so you've got to be conservative and assume that they are, which then reinforced it again. And the more I reinforce it, the more I believe it. The more I believe it, the more I reinforce it. One of the things that changed it for me is I went back to where I grew up and saw the areas where some of those memories are set. And there were some aspects to those memories or dreams that were not correct. And looking at the arrangement of things where they are, there was a couple that could not have happened. So for me, that's what I needed on my engineering brain to at least be able to put that question back into my head of maybe they're not real. Now, just prior to that, they were definitely real and they have been for a long time. But from that point, I was able to come back and talk with my psychologist and start going through some of these things and again understand the brain function side of things, of how these things can happen and how things that are not real can go into the part of our brain where they do become, to us, completely 100% real. And then since then, I've been trying to unlearn that process and unlearn those memories, and having the triggers and the tricks to do that. It's been an interesting journey to learn, but they're definitely, most of the time to me, they're dreams. Occasionally, I'll still go through the debate in my mind again. One of the tools that my psychologist gave me that was incredibly useful is she says, I need to come up with something is it's probably technically called a distraction technique, because I get into this loop. Okay, my brain goes, you can't have done that. That's horrible. And the other part of my brain goes, if you've done that, that's horrible. And this other little part of my brain goes, maybe you didn't. And then this other part of my brain would go, yes, you did. You know it. Stop trying to talk yourself out of it. And it just get louder and louder, this debate, and make that little voice quieter and quieter and quieter. So it's trying to break that cycle. And funnily enough, what worked for me, on the walls, you had some kids' toys, and there was a Mr. Potato Head. And the Australian humour part of my brain went, oh, Mr. Potato Head, there you go. I could picture Mr. Potato Head's lips falling off. And that became my distraction. So whenever that debate started in my head again, I'd picture Mr. Potato Head and his lips fall off. So now he can't argue anymore. That's gone. And it would trigger a different part of my brain. It triggers that childhood, a bit of fun, a bit of silly, and a bit of a laugh. And heck, it worked for me. So, it was a really fortunate moment to find that and find something that really worked. So it just keeps reinforcing that. Find someone to help you what you need, help you work out what you need to do to try and manage what you're going through. So the psychological aspects of it is hard to come to understand when this bit here is not working the way it used to, but also you don't have the knowledge about what's going on. You can't see from yourself what the changes are necessarily, to be able to put all that into perspective and try and work out a pathway forward to manage it. So yeah, having the assistance with that, in hindsight, if I had the neuropsychologist that I've got now much earlier, I think and hope it would have been a lot more helpful. So I advise anyone who's gone through this, as soon as possible, try and find someone to help you, and try and find someone that works with your personality. So I've worked with a psychologist that I didn't get a lot of benefit from, and I've worked with the neuropsychologist, as I said, that I definitely did. And she's great. I'll have things in the appointment where I take the line of woe is me, and she'll give me a kick up the bum, really, because for her, it's not being constructive. Let's refocus on where we need to go. And for me and my personality, I need to kick up the bum occasionally. It's great. But she really helps me stay focused and directed on going, all right, let's get to the important things and try and deal with that, work out some ways to manage them. So yeah, certainly I can advise that 100%. Anyone that's got encephalitis or gone through encephalitis, find a good person to talk to. Your support work's really important, but again, often you're not aware of the support that they're giving you, because you don't have that broader focus necessarily. And I've spent a lot of time focusing in here so deeply and trying to deal with what's going on in there. I don't see what's happening just beside me because I've got that tunnel vision happening. And my poor old wife has gone through a lot and put up with a lot. And so, I'm very grateful to watch. She's kept the house going while I've been off in La La Land trying to figure out things, been supportive of me, helped push me in the directions I need to go to get things working and sorted out. So yeah, understand and try and see those people that love you, that are around you, are trying to help you as well, because that does help. When I finally shared these stories with my wife, this is 18 years after going through encephalitis that I shared these stories with her, and she's known that I've been dealing with something horrible for a long time. And she's had to live on the sidelines of that and see the effects of that on me, but also suffer the effects back on her and the family too. Um, if she didn't have to deal with that, yeah, things would be so much easier. So, yeah, I just keep reinforcing, get help to help manage these things because it is hard for everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, the good and positive is I've dealt with a lot of it. I understand it. And that what was all dominating debate, 90% of the time is gone. And this really only come up 12 months ago where I started to find the way forward. So to make that bigger change in 12 months psychologically is absolutely amazing. And I'll still have times where I'm by myself and the little argument will start. But this good part of my brain then goes, Mr. Potato Head. And you get that distraction and I can push that away again. It's the tools that I've now got that help a lot. And hopefully, I like to think I'm in a much better headspace to see the things that are happening around me. And I want to be able to see those things that are happening around me in the rest of the world, what my family is doing, be much more constructive and helpful for them, and not be as hard work at times. So that's the crux of the key parts of my journey. Obviously, for everyone, there's a lot more details, but I've tried to cover the main points and not take too long. I see we've gone a little bit over time, Prav. But
No,
yeah,
no,
I sort
that's
of throw it
absolutely
back to
fine.
you.
Yeah, no, Dennis, thank you so much for your honesty about this. Of course, it happened 20 years ago, but you've taken us through this journey with you, and it's so powerful. And also, thank you for also explaining some of the techniques that have helped you as well, because some of these techniques I haven't heard about, for example, the distraction technique. So that's so useful for our community to know as well. And yeah, just to come to the end of the podcast, I was wondering if there's anything, any sort of advice you would give to anyone who has been affected by encephalitis.
It is hard because there's such a variety of how you can be affected and also um, your personality. So a thing that I've used a lot is what I say, that Kyokushinkai karate approach of just getting focused and pushing. But talking to my psychologist, there's a lot of reasons that that's not constructive as well. Um, One of the things that I've had a few times is where I've had no motivation anymore. In the dark times, and I'm in no motivation to keep going. And one of the things that helped me at that time was to look and find my motivation. Um, at the same time, I found psychologically I had no fear. And your teenage boys and your mid-20s boys think that's a fantastic thing. No fear, we're so brave, but actually no fear at all is a very, very different place. Because if you've got fear, it means there's something don't want to lose. When you've got no fear, well, for me, it meant that I had nothing there was nothing I wanted to live for. There was nothing I was hanging on to. So it's a scary place to be. What got me through that was trying to look at it and go, all right. Funnily enough, I was looking for things to be scared about. And the first one I found when I paused to have that thought came and hit me really quickly. I was scared of having encephalitis. I never want to have that again. So that was a big motivation for me going forward. But again, talking to my psychologist, that can be a really non-constructive approach too, but it's dependent on the person. I need things to focus on. I need to have some goals. I need to have some direction. That's me as a personality, things I want to work towards. But if I want to work towards something, I've got to have a reason to go there too. So yeah, for me, that was what I needed at the time. But again, getting the advice and getting someone you can share this with, and they can help you find that pathway that does work for you. For other people, they might be much more artistic and I don't want to get what I have is the tunnel vision. Get all the distractions when it's really hard. I just want to come in and focus here and push here. But for some people, that's definitely not the way.
Absolutely. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for being on this podcast and for sharing your story with us. It's been a real pleasure having you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. As I say, if anyone can get some benefits, by all means, I'm certainly happy to share what I can to help other people. It's one heck of a road,
Absolutely. And
but it's
finally, I'd like
worth
to,
it. Worth going. Worth keep going. Definitely keep going.
yes, never give up. Yeah. Um, and yeah, that does bring us to the end of the podcast. And yeah, thank you so much, Dennis, for being here. And I'd like to thank the audience as well for listening and watching. If you've been affected by any of the issues raised, wherever you live in the world, please contact our support services. Encephalitis International is here to help in whatever way we can to achieve our aim of ending death and disability from encephalitis. For all our information, as well as details on how to donate, please see the podcast description or visit www.encephalitis.info/donate. Thank you again, and see you next time on the Encephalitis Podcast.